Hello everyone, we are Group 11 and today we are going to talk to you about Unit 5 Analysis of Ethical Theories. And today we are going to only focus on the first three modules of the unit, which is first, types of ethical theory, second, teleological theories, and lastly, utilitarianism. So we will start today with the first module, types of ethical theory. This module will delve into various types of ethical theories with a focus on understanding the distinctions between different ethical systems. It also explores how these systems evaluate what is considered good and moral in society, focusing on intrinsic and instrumental good, and contrasting key ethical principles such as egoism, utilitarianism, deontology, and teleology. Para maging kumpleto ang isang ethical theory, it should adhere to three core elements. The first one is a statement of good. It must provide a clear definition of what is already considered good, either intrinsically or instrumentally, which we'll be talking about later. A statement of value. It must establish a basis for evaluating the worth or significance of certain actions or moral principles. And lastly, a statement of obligation. It must provide a framework for what actions individuals ought to take, emphasizing moral obligations and duties. So, ano nga ba ang intrinsic good and instrumental good, and what makes them different? First is intrinsic good. It refers to things that are valued for their own sake. These are ends in themselves and not merely means to achieving other goals. Examples of intrinsic goods often cited included happiness, love, and knowledge. The next one, which is instrumental good, refers to things that are valuable because they lead to something else that is good. For an example, money is considered an instrumental good because it can be used to obtain intrinsic goods like happiness or well-being. Ethical systems can be divided into monist and pluralist approaches. Let us start with monist. They claim that there's only one intrinsic good. For example, sa hedonism, promoted by Jeremy Bentham and others, which pag-uusapan yan on the next module, posits that pleasure is the only thing that is intrinsically good. Para naman sa mga pluralists, they argue that multiple things can be intrinsically good. John Dewey and other pluralist philosophers claim that goods such as happiness, knowledge, and beauty can all be valued intrinsically. Ethical theories are often classified into egoism and utilitarianism. Egoism, this theory asserts that individuals should act in ways that maximize their own good. Psychological egoism claims that individuals naturally act in their own self-interest, habang ethical egoism naman suggests that they ought to do so. Egoists argue that each person should prioritize their own happiness and well-being above others. Utilitarianism naman is nakabaligtaran ng egoism. Utilitarianism argues that the right action is the one that maximizes the greatest good for the greatest number of people. It is a consequentialist theory, meaning the morality of an action is determined by its outcomes. There are two main versions of utilitarianism: limited utilitarianism and universal utilitarianism. Sa limited utilitarianism, this form of utilitarianism maximizes the good for a specific interest group or sector sa society, like a family, association, or a religious group. However, it may result in making other groups worse off. This version is often practiced by specific interest groups sa society. The next one is universal utilitarianism. This pure form of utilitarianism argues that the good should be maximized for all of humankind without any discrimination at all. Every individual is treated equally and no person or group is given preferential treatment. As the principle goes, everyone counts for one and no one for more than one. So our last topic naman dito sa ating module is deontological and teleological. The deontological and teleological approaches, after contrasting views on ethical obligations. Sa mga deontologists, they focus on the rightness or wrongness of actions themselves rather sa kanilang mga consequences. Immanuel Kant, a leading deontologist, argues that actions must follow universal moral laws, like truth-telling regardless of the outcomes. Sa teleologists naman, they believe that the morality of an action depends sa kanyang outcomes. In this view, actions are judged based on whether they bring about the desired consequences. For teleologists, the end justifies the means.
Teleological ethics evaluates actions based on their outcomes. An action is considered good if it leads to positive results and bad if it causes negative ones. This approach includes theories like utilitarianism, which aims to maximize happiness for the greatest number of people, and ethical egoism, which focuses on benefiting oneself. A key belief of teleologists is that while some actions tend to produce better outcomes than others, these outcomes should serve only as guidelines. It's important to realize that good outcomes won't always follow the same pattern in every situation. In fact, there may be times when acting contrary to what's usually seen as good leads to better results, like lying if it would prevent harm rather than telling the truth. On the other hand, we have deontological ethics, which says that the morality of an action depends on its nature rather than its results. This means that some actions are simply right or wrong based on moral rules or duties that we must follow, regardless of the consequences. Deontologists emphasize the importance of adhering to moral rules, believing that certain actions are wrong, no matter how good the outcomes might be. The basic disagreement among teleologists is about what we should consider as the intrinsic good that we need to promote or maximize. Quantitative hedonists like Jeremy Bentham define good mainly in terms of physical pleasure or happiness. They believe that the right action is the one that maximizes the amount of pleasure and minimizes pain. On the other hand, qualitative hedonists focuses on the quality of pleasure rather than just the quantity. They argue that some pleasure, especially intellectual and artistic ones, are more valuable than mere physical pleasures. Both qualitative and quantitative hedonists agree that there is only one basic intrinsic good, which makes them monists. In contrast, non-hedonists argue that there are many different things that can be intrinsically good, not just pleasure. Because they recognize multiple goods, they are known as pluralists. This broader view is often associated with a type of teleology called utilitarianism, which emphasizes the greater good for the greater number, regardless of the type of good being promoted. The key distinction among these theories revolve around who benefits from the good. Egoism is the theory that seeks action that maximizes their own pleasure. The core question here is, what will enhance my self-interest? This self-centered approach emphasizes their individual gain. In contrast, utilitarianism advocates for the greater good of the community. It argues that moral actions should aim to maximize happiness for the largest number of people, ensuring the equal distribution of good and avoiding favoritism towards oneself. In this module, Module 2, Cyrenaic and Epicurean philosophies are also discussed. The Cyrenaics, an ancient Greek school of thought, argued that the pursuit of immediate sensory pleasures as the ultimate goal in life and our attraction to pleasure is instinctual, and that once we attain it, we seek nothing more. Central to their belief is the idea that pain should be shunned at all costs, with sensual pleasure taking precedence over intellectual ones. For the Cyrenaics, maximizing immediate gratification in the present moment is essential, with little regard to the long-term consequences of their actions. In contrast, Epicurus, the founder of Epicurean philosophy, provided a different outlook on pleasure and happiness. He argued that the highest pleasure lies not in indulgence, but in achieving freedom from pain in both the body and the mind. Epicurus emphasized the importance of viewing life holistically, taking into account the significance of past pleasures and the potential impact of present choices on future well being. Jeremy Bentham argues that our choices are mainly influenced by pleasure and pain. These two forces help us decide not only what is right or wrong, but what we actually do. Central to Bentham's idea is the principle of utility. This principle suggests we should evaluate our actions by looking at how much happiness they create or how much pain they prevent. It emphasizes that we need to think about the happiness of both the individuals and the larger community, since communities are made up of individual people. This leads us to an important question. Can the pursuit of personal happiness help the community as a whole? In real life, people sometimes need to put aside their own interests for the benefit of the others, and this is where Bentham's idea can become complicated. To help people make a conscious decision, Bentham invented hedonistic calculus, which suggested factors in order to calculate the amount of pleasure and pain an action will cause, which includes number one, which is intensity, which pertains to how hard or how physically demanding an act is. Number two, which is duration, which is how long the act will take to accomplish, and number three, which is certainty or uncertainty, which is the level of certainty or a guarantee that the action will be successful or will bear the desired outcome. Number four, propinquity or remoteness, which is how close the location of the action is in relation to the person that will do the action. Bentham also made three other criteria in case you are in doubt regarding the value of pleasure or pain. Number one is fecundity, refers to the possibility that the pleasure or pain caused by the action will repeat in the future. And number two, which is purity, the degree of the absence of pain in the pleasure that an action gives. And number three, which is extent, how many people will be affected by the pleasure or pain that the action will cause. Bentham also mentioned that his perspective or view on what is morally right. He says that an action will be morally right if it causes the most pleasure for the most people. A moral agent must aim to produce the greatest possible amount of happiness for the greatest possible amount of people. That excludes yourself from the equation. Though Bentham mentioned that you should prioritize others in the community, Bentham also mentioned that this does not apply to the whole entirety of humanity but only to his parochial community. His ethical theory is dubbed the limited utilitarianism.
Now, let's discuss the next module, Module 3, that talks about utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is a moral philosophy that has had a profound influence on ethical thinking for over 200 years. As its core, it seeks to evaluate the rightness or wrongness of actions based on their capacity to maximize happiness and minimize pain for the greatest number of people. The theory was initially formalized by Jeremy Bentham, who proposed a straightforward, measurable approach known as quantitative hedonism, which focuses solely on the amount of pleasure an action can produce. However, utilitarian thought was further refined by John Stuart Mill, who introduced the idea that not all pleasures are of equal value. He emphasized a qualitative aspect, suggesting that intellectual and moral pleasure are superior to mere physical satisfaction. In this presentation, we will dive into the contributions of both Bentham and Mill, examine the key differences between their interpretations of utilitarianism, and explore how their ideas continue to shape contemporary discussions in moral philosophy. Jeremy Bentham, often regarded as the founder of utilitarianism, approached ethics through a quantitative lens. He developed a method known as the hedonistic calculus, which aims to measure the amount of pleasure and pain produced by various actions. According to Bentham, the morally right action is the one that produces the greatest amount of pleasure or the least amount of pain. His method is straightforward. When faced with a moral dilemma, one should compare the potential outcomes and choose the one with the best balance of pleasure over pain. Bentham's approach is purely quantitative, famously arguing that even simple pleasures, like playing a game of pushpin, are as valuable as more intellectual pursuits, like music or poetry, as long as they provide more pleasure. John Stuart Mill, on the other hand, introduced a more nuanced perspective with his greatest happiness principle. He argued that the goal of all moral actions should be the maximization of happiness, but with an important caveat. Not all pleasures are of equal value. Mill distinguished between higher pleasures, such as intellectual and artistic enjoyment, and lower pleasures, which are bodily or sensual. According to Mill, achieving the greatest happiness is not just about experiencing more pleasure, but about seeking out pleasures that are of a higher, more meaningful quality. Intellectual and artistic pleasures, for instance, provide a deeper sense of fulfillment compared to simple physical pleasures. He famously said, "It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied." Through this, Mill illustrates that those who have experienced both higher and lower pleasures will always prefer the higher ones, even if they come with some dissatisfaction or discomfort. For Mill, the pursuit of intellectual and moral growth offers more profound and lasting satisfaction than mere physical pleasure, suggesting that the quality of happiness plays a crucial role in determining the rightness of actions. In essence, Mill's view highlights that a life filled with deeper, more complex experiences, even if accompanied by some challenges, is far superior to one focused only on simple, fleeting pleasures. Mill's qualitative hedonism marked a significant departure from Bentham's purely quantitative approach. While Bentham argued that all pleasures could be measured equally, Mill insisted that intellectual and spiritual pleasures were intrinsically superior to bodily pleasures. To defend this position, Mill introduced a criterion for judging the quality of pleasure, the preference of those who have experienced both types. For example, someone like Socrates, who has experienced both intellectual and bodily pleasures, would naturally prefer the intellectual ones, even if they come with dissatisfaction. This concept complicates Bentham's simplistic hedonistic calculus, but Mill believed it was essential for a more meaningful moral framework. In his work, John Stuart Mill offers one of the most controversial arguments for utilitarianism, his proof of the principle of utility. Mill proposes that the only way to prove something is desirable is by showing that people actually desire it. He draws an analogy to other sensory experiences, just as the fact that people see something proves it is visible. The fact that people desire happiness is the only proof needed that happiness is desirable. Mill's reasoning can be broken down into 5 essential steps, forming the basis of his proof. First one, each person desires their own happiness. This is an observable fact about human nature. Individuals naturally seek their own happiness. Second, therefore, general happiness is desirable by everyone. Since everyone desires happiness for themselves, the concept of happiness, in general, is something that all people value. Third one, desirability equals being desired. Mill asserts that something is considered desirable only if people desire it. There is no other criterion for determining whether something is worth pursuing. Fourth one, therefore, general happiness is the only thing desirable in itself. As happiness is what people universally seek, it becomes the ultimate goal, the only thing intrinsically valuable. And the last one is, thus, the rightness of action is determined by their ability to promote the greatest happiness. Finally, Mill concludes that if happiness is the highest good, then the moral worth of an action depends on how much it contributes to the overall happiness of society. The greatest happiness for the greatest number. This proof, though widely debated, provides the foundation for Mill's utilitarian ethics. It shows how he connects personal desires for happiness with the broader goal of maximizing happiness for all, which becomes the guiding principle for determining the rightness or wrongness of actions. While both Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill focus on hedonistic utilitarianism, which centers on the idea that happiness or pleasure is the ultimate good, a more modern approach has expanded the definition of what is considered good. This variation is known as non-hedonistic utilitarianism, and it includes a broader range of values beyond just pleasure. In non-hedonistic utilitarianism, philosophers argue that moral actions should not only aim for pleasure but also pursue other valuable aspects of life, such as knowledge, beauty, and wisdom. This pluralistic concept of the good emphasizes that there are multiple goods worth maximizing, not just happiness or sensory pleasure. An important example of non-hedonistic utilitarianism is Hastings Rushell's ideal utilitarianism. Rushell proposed that actions are morally right when they promote an ideal good that includes a variety of values, such as intellectual and aesthetic fulfillment, rather than just focusing on pleasure alone. For Rushell, the good is more than just feeling pleasure. It encompasses a diverse set of experiences and virtues, which makes his view distinct from the more singular focus of Bentham and Mill. This pluralistic view broadens the moral scope of utilitarianism, suggesting that human well-being is multifaceted and should aim to cultivate a range of valuable experiences and outcomes, not just the maximization of pleasure and avoidance of pain. Utilitarianism is often divided into two distinct approaches, Acuutilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. Both aim to maximize happiness, but they differ in how they apply the principle of utility. Acuutilitarianism focuses on evaluating individual actions. Prominent philosophers like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill supported this approach, which asks the question, what action will lead to the most happiness in this specific situation? The emphasis is on the consequences of a single action, where the moral worth is judged based on its ability to maximize pleasure and minimize pain in that particular instance. In contrast, rule utilitarianism evaluates the morality of general rules rather than individual actions. Instead of analyzing specific acts, rule utilitarians ask what rules, if followed by everyone all the time, will maximize overall happiness. The focus is on creating consistent moral guidelines that, when applied broadly, lead to the greatest good for society as a whole. To better understand the distinction, let's consider the example of cheating on an exam. An acuutilitarian might argue that cheating is justified if it results in immediate benefits, such as passing the course by maximizing pleasure and avoiding the pain of failure. They would focus solely on the consequences of that specific act. However, a rule utilitarian would take a different view. They would argue that allowing cheating violates the general rule of intellectual honesty, which is essential for maintaining fairness and trust in academic systems. Even if cheating provides short-term benefits, breaking the rule would undermine the system's integrity and lead to negative consequences for society in the long run. Therefore, cheating would be considered morally wrong under rule utilitarianism because it fails to promote the overall good when applied as a rule. In summary, while acuutilitarians assess individual actions case by case, rule utilitarians focus on establishing and adhering to the rules that will consistently lead to the best outcomes for everyone.
And that's all. Thank you for watching our presentation. Goodbye.